Story 1. The Roommate. Starting university was supposed to be an exciting chapter in my life. I had just unpacked my things, waved goodbye to my family, and settled into my new dorm. But the sense of possibility quickly faded when my roommate arrived. From the moment I met him, something about Mark was off. He shuffled into the room without saying a word, barely glancing at me as I introduced myself. When I extended my hand for a handshake, he hesitated, then gave me a limp, unsettling grip before muttering his name. Attempts at small talk were futile. Mark only responded in monotone yes or no answers, often followed by an awkward, almost robotic laugh. By the end of the day, we were sitting in silence, each on our respective beds, the air between us thick with unease. That first night, I tried to sleep, but Mark stayed up on his laptop until the early hours. I finally drifted off, only to wake up to an eerie sight. Mark sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at me. His silhouette was illuminated by the pale moonlight streaming through the open blinds. "Mark," I whispered, my voice trembling, "what are you doing?" He didn't move. He didn't blink. Then, in a soft, chilling voice, he muttered, "Sorry," and lay down as if nothing had happened. Things only got worse. During orientation, I overheard students laughing about a weird guy sitting in the dirt behind a bush, stroking the bark of a tree. When I looked, it was Mark. That evening, I discovered someone had been through my laptop. My emails and folders were opened. Files I hadn't touched scrolled through. When I confronted Mark, he denied it, but his jittery response only confirmed my suspicions. The final straw came when I woke up to the sound of a zipper. Mark was crouched on the floor, rifling through my bag. I flipped on the lamp and he froze like a deer in headlights. His excuse? "I thought I left my toothbrush in here." I reported everything to campus housing and was moved to a new dorm the next day. But that night, as I lay in bed with my new roommate, I woke up to the sound of faint, deliberate clicks. The door handle was turning. Through the peephole, I saw Mark standing outside, his head tilted downward, his hand methodically testing the lock. Campus police arrived quickly and took him away. I never saw him again, but even now, years later, I sometimes wake up at night expecting to see his silhouette in the darkness. Story 2. The Forest Encounter. My university had a secluded nature preserve behind campus, a place where my friends and I would go to unwind. It was the perfect escape from the stress of lectures and deadlines, with its winding trails and serene lake. One crisp October night, we decided to have a small bonfire by the lake. The spot was far from campus security's usual patrols, perfect for avoiding trouble. It was just the three of us, me and Jack and Lisa, sipping beers and laughing, the crackle of the fire our only soundtrack. The night was cool, and the stars above seemed impossibly bright. We were in the middle of swapping ghost stories when we heard it, the crunch of leaves and the snap of branches in the woods. We froze, listening. At first, we thought it might be campus police, so we hurried to stash the beers and douse the fire. But as the sounds grew louder, it became clear this wasn't an officer. Whoever it was, they were circling us, deliberately staying just out of sight. "Probably just a deer," Jack said, though his voice wavered. Lisa shook her head. "Deer don't throw things." She gestured to a large stick lying near the fire, a stick none of us had noticed before. Branches snapped closer now, and a heavy thud startled us. A large tree branch had been hurled into our campsite, landing inches from the fire. My heart pounded as we scanned the darkness, trying to make out who or what was out there. Then we heard it, low guttural breathing, so faint it was almost drowned out by the night's natural symphony. Jack bolted into the woods without a word, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly between the trees. "Jack, stop!" I called, but he was already gone. Lisa and I were left alone, clutching each other, the firelight flickering against the encroaching darkness. Then out of nowhere, another branch came flying, this time striking Lisa square in the face. She cried out, blood dripping down her cheek, and I knew we couldn't stay any longer. Grabbing her arm, I pulled her to her feet, and we ran as fast as we could, weaving through the trees, the ground uneven beneath our feet. The sounds behind us grew louder, footsteps, snapping branches, and that relentless, labored breathing. I dared a glance back and saw a shadowy figure, its movements unnatural, almost jerky, as it pursued us. Its shape was human-like, but something about it was wrong. When we reached the edge of the woods, we dared to look back. The figure stood at the tree line, swaying slightly, as if deciding whether to follow us further. The faint glow of passing car headlights illuminated it briefly, and I swear its face wasn't human. It was distorted, as though it was wearing a mask that didn't quite fit. We stumbled onto the main road, gasping for breath, and flagged down the first car we saw. The driver, a kind older woman, called campus security for us. When they arrived and we tried to explain what had happened, they chalked it up to an animal encounter or a prank by other students. But Lisa and I knew better. Jack was found hours later, disoriented and mumbling about eyes in the trees and hands that don't belong. He never told us exactly what he saw that night, and we never asked. None of us returned to the preserve after that, and to this day, the memory of those sounds, the snapping branches, the guttural breathing, haunts me. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear it again, faint and distant, as if it's still out there, waiting. Story 3. The Fraternity Party. My roommate was eager to join a fraternity and convinced me to tag along to a party at one of the lesser-known houses. The frat house was tucked away in a grimy part of town, far from the main campus. From the outside, it looked more like an abandoned shack than a place for parties. Inside, the air was thick with sweat and the smell of cheap beer. The dim lighting barely illuminated the room packed with strangers. I nursed a plastic cup of stale beer while my roommate mingled. Then a heavy-set guy approached me, smirking as he handed me a small bottle of liquor. "This'll get you wrecked," he said, his voice oily. I hesitated, but he stood there waiting, his grin unwavering. Feeling the pressure, I took a sip. Within minutes, the room began to spin. My limbs felt heavy, and my vision blurred. The last thing I remembered was collapsing onto a couch. I woke up in a dark room, my head pounding. The muffled bass of the party thumped through the walls. As I tried to sit up, I realized my arms were bound to the bed with duct tape. Panic surged through me. Footsteps echoed outside the door. Shadows moved under the crack of light. My mind raced with fear, wondering who had done this and what they intended. A muffled voice outside the door sent chills down my spine. It was the same oily voice of the man who had handed me the liquor. "You think he's awake yet?" someone asked. "Doesn't matter," came the reply. "We can start soon." Summoning every ounce of strength, I wriggled my arms, feeling the tape loosen against my skin. My heart pounded as I heard the doorknob turn. With a burst of adrenaline, I broke free, just as the door creaked open. I lunged forward, shoving past the startled man in the doorway. My bare feet slapped against the wooden floors as I bolted down the dimly lit hallway. The house was a maze of shadows and disoriented partygoers, oblivious to my panic. I stumbled into a room where two people were passed out on a couch, their heads tilted back, mouths agape. Their indifference only heightened my desperation. I kept running until I found the front door and threw it open, gasping for the fresh night air. I didn't stop running until I reached campus security. The officers were initially skeptical, but when they saw the raw abrasions on my wrists and my frantic state, they knew something had happened. The frat house was raided the next day. While authorities discovered several illicit items, including drugs and fake IDs, no one was arrested. The frat members claimed ignorance, insisting the items belonged to random partygoers. But I'll never forget the sinister smile of that man, or the feeling of helplessness in that dark room. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see the crack of light under the door and the shadows pacing back and forth, waiting.